Hey, what's up, guys? It's T-Dog Reviews, and today I'm finally going to be reviewing the entire series of Vagabond. I've been reading this series for pretty much a little over a month now, and I finally finished it, so I'm really excited to finally just sit down and say all my thoughts about it because it was a pretty hefty one. It was 37 volumes long. Now, I should probably address the elephant in the room and say that Vagabond is actually currently an ongoing manga, but it's been on hiatus for about 5 years, and Takehiko Inoue is currently working on his other manga, Real, so the manga probably isn't going to return ever, and it's probably not going to finish ever, but Takehiko Inoue actually did do a mock-up ending for Vagabond at an art exhibition, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. It's not really a big part of what I'm going to be talking about, but I'll definitely mention it some more later. So, the series Vagabond follows a guy named Takezo, who later becomes Miyamoto Musashi, and he chooses this name because his birthplace is actually called Miyamoto Village. So, of course, he named himself after his birthplace in honor of where he's from. And the series is really about Miyamoto Musashi's journey to become a really great samurai. And at the start of the manga, he actually doesn't even really use a real sword. I mean, at the start of the manga, pretty much all the characters use either wooden swords or wooden spears or something like that. I mean, they don't even really use like actual swords until a good chunk in through the series. But Miyamoto Musashi is basically an unstoppable samurai, and he is just ruthless, and especially at the start of the series, he is just incredibly strong, and it's pretty clear that he's prioritizing his strength at the start of the series over his honor. And I think that's really interesting because with a lot of samurai, they either prioritize strength or honor. And in Vagabond, it's pretty clear that Miyamoto Musashi either has to prioritize one of these two goals, because if he prioritizes honor, he's going to have to sacrifice some of his strength, and it's going to make him a little bit weaker overall, or at least perceived weaker overall. Whereas if he prioritizes strength, he's going to have to sacrifice some of his honor because he's going to have to do some things that are kind of ruthless and against some of the samurai codes that are usually followed. And that's really one of the main reasons why Musashi is so strong in the early parts of the series, because he really just doesn't care about honor. He really only cares about strength. But as the manga goes on, he starts to focus more on his honor, and it really makes for some interesting stuff and some really interesting character development. Now, the second main character in the series is Musashi's childhood friend named Matahachi. And early on the series, Matahachi actually takes on the name of another samurai named Kojiro. And I find it really interesting how Musashi and Matahachi take two very different journeys throughout the series. I mean, Musashi, he's really trying to carve out his own path and form his own identity, whereas Matahachi, he's really kind of just focusing on carrying out the legacy of this other samurai. And even though throughout the series Matahachi does kind of form an identity of his own, he's really kind of just not sure who he wants to be at the start of the series. But basically, Musashi's journey is mainly about him becoming better and sort of getting stronger both mentally and physically, whereas Matahachi's journey, it's kind of him discovering who he is, and I think both those journeys are two really interesting plot lines. And I find it kind of funny how early on in the manga, Matahachi is like, oh, Takezo, we're gonna make names for ourselves, and yep.
You can say that again, pal.
Now, I definitely think there are a lot of really interesting philosophical themes in this manga, and I think one of the characters who has some of my favorite quotes is the character Takuon, who almost kind of serves as a moral guide for Musashi. Now, early on the series, the character Takuon says, "Preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree. Preoccupied with a single tree, you'll miss the entire forest." And what I find really interesting about this is I think it was actually a real quote from the actual figure Takuon, because if you don't know, the series Vagabond is largely based on historical Japanese figures, and, you know, of course, Miyamoto Musashi is one of the most legendary samurai of all time. Now, even though that actual quote is such a small part of the manga, it's definitely an important theme that's carried throughout the entire series. Now, I think for the most part, the first 13 or so volumes get progressively crazier, and this content is honestly just incredible. But after this, from volumes 14 to 20, there's kind of a slow arc in the series that focuses on a different character. Now, even though this arc starts off really good, I definitely think the end of this arc feels pretty dragged out, and honestly, I kind of had to force myself to read the end of this. Now, of course, volumes 14 through 20 are very important to the actual manga. I mean, if it wasn't important, it probably wouldn't be this long of an arc, but I mean, it definitely could have been a little shorter in my opinion. I definitely think the end of the arc was a little boring in some parts, but overall, this arc definitely had a long-lasting impact on the rest of Vagabond, and I definitely think the beginning part of this arc is pretty fantastic. Now, next up, I really want to talk about the artwork, because some of the artwork in Vagabond is really just mesmerizing. And honestly, Vagabond probably has some of the best manga artwork I've seen in my life. I mean, if I were to make a list of the top 10 best artwork I've seen in manga, Vagabond would definitely be top 3, maybe even top 1. And overall, the art style of the series is just really unique, and I don't think this manga would be nearly as good if the art style wasn't this incredible. Now, pretty much the only big complaint I have with Vagabond is that some parts of the series can honestly be kind of a drag, and there were definitely some parts towards the end of the series where there would be a lot of dialogue, not a lot of big character moments going on, not a lot of fights going on, or really a lot of scenes with important characters. And honestly, some of those scenes would be kind of boring. And honestly, some of those scenes I would really have to force myself to read because some of that content really just wasn't super entertaining. And I think that's really the biggest downfall with Vagabond. I think the rest of the series is pretty incredible, but there were definitely some scenes where I just wasn't that entertained or that interested. And I think that's really my biggest complaint I can give. Now, maybe that's just me. I mean, I know I have kind of a low attention span, but I mean, seriously, some of the stuff in this manga was a little bit of a snooze fest, but overall, I think it was pretty great. So, lastly, I want to talk about the ending of the series, because the last major arc in the series is the farming arc. And needless to say, I think it's safe to say at this point that any manga with a farming arc is bound to be good. I mean, the farming arc in Vagabond was easily top 3 arcs in the entire series. And I mean, I've got Vinland Saga on my shelf down there. And of course, my favorite arc in Vinland Saga is also the farming arc. And I think that the farming arc really has a lot of nice closure to the series. So if you're worried about getting into Vagabond just because it's on hiatus, I mean, you really don't have to worry about that too much because Volume 37 is a really good stopping point, and even though there are really only like 4 chapters after this, I mean, still, this is just a really good arc in the series. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, even though the series doesn't have a definitive ending, Takahiko Inoue actually did do an art exhibition where he pretty much drew out the ending of Vagabond and the ending of Musashi's journey. Now, admittedly, I actually didn't check out the entire art exhibition because I think it's pretty long and there aren't really any official translations that I know of right now, so I think I might just wait a little bit to check that out. But I was doing some research on it and I was watching some videos about it, and I thought it was a pretty incredible ending to the story, and I definitely hope it gets an English release at some point, even if it's just kind of a small little thing. Anyways, that about wraps it up for my main thoughts on Vagabond, and honestly, it's kind of hard to give a score of this series because it's so long, and I feel like there's a lot of stuff in the series I really like, but there's definitely also some parts that are kind of slow. But overall, I still think it's a pretty incredible series, and if I was held at gunpoint right now, and if I was forced to give a score to Vagabond, I'd probably give it a 4.5 out of 5, which is a pretty good score. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to slap the like button, subscribe, drop a comment, and smash the notification bell. I really want to read some good manga before I make my big top 20 manga list. I think next up I'm going to read Pipochu and then Chainsaw Man, and I'm probably going to really like both of those, so hopefully I do. And with all that being said and done, I will see you guys in the next video.